Hello watch enthusiasts! Now it's been a few months since I last spoke about value where pilots' watches were concerned, but today I'd like to produce a video speaking about that very theme. And since I've produced videos in the past about this theme, I would like to note that none of the pieces I've spoken about in previous videos I would at all regard as no longer being good value. However, I'd like to produce a video which covers perhaps a slightly wider range of prices than previously shown, because the watches I'm going to show in this video run from a few £100s all the way through to over £5,000 in the case of the most elaborate and most expensive piece I'm talking about. But the one thing that all of them share is a unique design and style in terms of what they're trying to achieve, the utmost quality for their price range, and also a very high regard in terms of trying to incorporate the maximum number of features and details into an affordable package. The first piece I'd like to speak about is a very humble piece from the Seiko 5 line. And the Seiko 5 line has now been produced for around half a century, and it's really the bottom mechanical range that Seiko produces, and this is by no means a bad thing, because the idea of the Seiko 5 was to be a water-resistant, shock-proof, and generally multi-purpose watch from Seiko that provided a very high level of quality, a mechanical movement, and a build which really was synonymous with the quality that Seiko have been known for. And this version is the SNK 800 line of watch. And this is a very humble piece in terms of its price range, running from around £80 to about £120, depending upon where you buy it from. But I feel this offers a wonderful entrance point into the world of pilot's watches, with a very classic pilot-style dial and a very military form of case with this bead-blasted finish. Now to start with the general attributes of this watch, with this timepiece you get a 37mm stainless steel case, which is finished in this bead-blasted finish to give it a very military look, and a hard-wearing finish at that. Now, this case is 37mm in diameter, which is certainly on the small side for a sports watch. However, one does have to note the fact that this watch is very much in proportion to its movement, but also will be a very versatile size whether you have smaller wrists or larger wrists, as it takes a more classic form in terms of its size and sits in the middle of the wrist rather than spanning right across it. Similarly, the short lugs add to this element, which means that straps will fit very comfortably on this watch, but one does have to note the fact that the watch is of a smaller size. Then the back of the watch features a great deal of polishing as well, though on this watch there's very little ornamentation, as the watch really is designed to follow that idea of a utilitarian timepiece. With that being said though, one mustn't disregard the fact that the quality of this watch really is very impressive. These watches are finished and bead blasted to a very high standard, and Seiko tend to be able to produce the best finishes for this sort of price range, which is regularly very impressive, especially for those who haven't handled one of these and then come from a more expensive watch and take a look at these, because the quality is remarkable, quite frankly, for the price. However, one does have to note that elements like a signed crown and decoration on the movement simply aren't possible for this sort of price of £80 to £120. Now, where the dial is concerned, there's a great deal of variation, because it's available with a black dial, a white dial, a blue dial and a green dial, and there has also been a khaki dial in the past. And so one really is able to get hold of a great deal of different, quite classically correct colours, though my favourite I must say is the white, because it comes across as a slightly off cream with black indices instead of the white on other dials. And the dials do come across as very different depending on the colour, where the black ones tend to look a little bit more glossy, and the green ones tend to look more matted. But altogether they do share the one design, which is having this Flieger style of dial, where you have the hours around the centre of the dial and then the minutes around the edge, which gives a much higher legibility option for pilots, and has been used since the 1930s. The watch also has large luminous styles of lozenge-shaped hands, in addition to a flat hardlex crystal. And hardlex is Seiko's own proprietary type of mineral crystal, which provides a very high level of bump resistance and resistance to chips and knocks, although isn't quite as scratch resistant as sapphire, though this allows the watch to be more affordable, and also really replacing one of these crystals will be far less expensive than having a sapphire crystal put in the first place. And so when one bears in mind how this watch works, really the movement is the heart of the piece, and it uses a 7S26 from Seiko, and this isn't in-house movement, but is one of the most well-known movements in the world. Now these are automatic movements which are shock resistant and run at 3 Hz, in addition to having automatic winding and having 21 joules. And in many ways these are very robust and very reliable movements, and have been used for years with few problems and with extremely long service intervals. And the beauty of these movements really is that they're inexpensive to repair and maintain, and can be brought up to a very high level of accuracy and indeed fidelity in terms of the quality of their movements, and so really is the perfect choice for this piece, and of course can be seen through the case back. And so for about £80 to £120, these make an exceptional option if you're looking for something which is reliable, attractive, and will bring you into the fold of mechanical, automatic styles of pilot's watches. Now, where the price range of between a few £100 and about the £1,000 mark is concerned, there's a great deal of competition in terms of pilot's watches on the market. And I often speak about Larco and the quality of their Flieger watches, and in fact I will be speaking about those in a few weeks when I speak about some very interesting remakes of vintage watches. But today I'd like to speak about a piece from Stowa. And Stowa is a brand which, like Larco, has produced pilot's watches for many years, really since the 1930s. And the quality of their watches is renowned in terms of being handmade timepieces with a very high level of detail and a great deal of craftsmanship going into them as well. And this is also by no means a large brand in terms of the amount of watches they make, and so as a result there's a real handmade touch to their timepieces, which is very appealing. But the piece I'd like to speak about today is by no means a conventional Flieger watch, because this is a piece which plays on the concept into the Stowa Flieger Verus Sport 43. And there is another version of the Verus, which is the 40mm version, but I feel in terms of value the 43 is really the piece to go for. And the concept behind this watch is to create a modern interpretation of the Flieger watch. And of course Flieger watches were military pilots' watches in the 30s and the 40s. But this piece has been upscaled from the conventional 40mm the brand goes in for to 43. It's also remained 12.8mm thick, which means it's a very wearable size and a very reasonable size if you want something comfortable. Though the lug-to-lug length is quite long at 51mm, this shouldn't pose a problem because it does have a quite severe curve to the case, which works very well with the shape of a wrist. But really the beauty of this watch is a fantastic balance between the aesthetics of a pilot's watch and the resilience of a sports watch in its most general form. Because the piece features a screw-down crown in this onion form and has a 200-metre water resistance, so you can swim with the watch very comfortably without any concern whatsoever. But if one ignores the case's very significant resilience to the elements, it does still feature a very delicate style of brushing throughout, which is applied by hand, which is a very appealing concept, bearing in mind the fact that a lot of watches have quite a coarse style of brushing, and this provides a much more delicate style of finishing and a great deal more finesse. And you'll also notice the fact that it has a thickened bezel, which contributes to that water resistance, but also protects the sapphire crystal on the front of this watch extremely well. And the sapphire crystal I feel is the tip of the iceberg in terms of this piece being a very modern watch, because in addition to this highly scratch-resistant sapphire crystal, it does also feature a redesigned dial. Because as you can see, it features the same rather traditional style of Flieger design with that triangle and two pips at 12 o'clock. But where previous Fliegers have very sharp numerals and quite small ones in relation to the size of their dial, this is quite the opposite, with large, almost blobby numerals, which appear still very precise and very, very well applied in terms of their design on the dial. And of course these glow like the hands a very bright and vivid blue, thanks to being applied in BGW9 Superluminova. And the application of Luminova is very helpful because that second hand stands out extremely well, and thanks to the fact that it has no counterweight, the other hands are never obscured as it passes them. The watch is also available with the option of a date or no date, which means you can have a cleaner or a slightly more complex dial, though both ways it's painted the same black as the dial and thus won't intrude in terms of the coloration or the legibility of the piece. And the choice of movement for this watch is, I feel, a very good one, because they've chosen the ETA 2824-2, except you can choose between a price of €960 for the standard grade, which isn't decorated but does still have a Stowa rotor, or you can go for the top grade version, which is generally more tightly specified and regulated, which will come in at €1,090 and features blued screws and full decoration, in addition to that rather beautiful Stowa custom rotor on it. But either way, I feel this watch offers an incredible amount in terms of being a very high quality and also very historically interesting watch, with a design which is very modern and very crisp at the same time as being an homage to earlier watches. Now, bearing in mind the fact that this video is talking about value and not necessarily the amount of features or the amount of technological advances watches have in them, this Longines is a fantastic option in terms of delivering phenomenal quality in terms of the detailing and the finishing, and a very impressive mechanical product as well. But to explain really why I've chosen this watch, one has to look at what Longines has been doing recently. Because I've spoken about this particular version of the Longines Avigation BigEye quite a great deal over the past few months. But really the reason is that in recent years Longines has done an extremely good job of making remakes of their vintage models, from pieces like the Conquest through to the flagship. But the beauty of Longines heritage models is they don't go down the unfortunate trap of trying to make the watches look aged and give them aged Luminova, for example. Instead, these are just solidly produced and high-quality pieces, with a few hints and details from their past. To start with basic dimensions, the watch features a 41mm case with a 14.45mm thickness. The case is of course stainless steel in the case of this piece, and is beautifully finished with a great deal of lustre on the bezel, with a very fine area of polishing around the crystal, then polished pushers, polished crown, and then these brushed elements throughout the lugs and the sides of the case. But really with this piece, it's the details that make the watch stand out. And around the case one immediately notices the very large pushers. And the reason for this is that this watch is designed after a piece from Longines' history, which was a pilot's watch of almost identical design. And it also features these large and highly easily pushed pushers at the 2 o'clock and the 4 o'clock positions. And whilst this is a very traditional way of laying out the watch, it does make it very wearable and extremely useful in relation to the fact that this watch would have been worn with gloves, and so would need pushers that were easily accessed. Similarly, the crystal takes a hint of history, with a box style of form. And boxed sapphire crystals are certainly expensive to make, and thus are very difficult for smaller brands to produce, but the beauty of buying from a large brand like Longines is they can afford to produce these at a more affordable price. And this allows the sapphire crystal to extend upwards out of the case and curve over into a subtle dome, which is an expensive process but a truly beautiful one in terms of mimicking acrylic crystals of the past. Underneath the crystal one sees a very complex, but rather subtly complex dial. And the dial is black, as you can see, with a matted finish to most of the dial, and then a sunburst concentric effect to the subdials. The indices are small with minute graduations, but then one has large Arabic numerals which are luminescent and match the luminescent hour and minute hands. Then the detailing on the dial is relatively sparse but rather well applied, simply having Longines automatic on the dial with Swiss made at the bottom. Then the 3 subdials indicate the standard elements of a chronograph, with the running seconds at 9 o'clock, the chronograph minutes at 3 o'clock, and the hours at 6 o'clock. Then you have a very simple but beautifully polished second hand, which has been given this rather elegant tip, and then also these rather unique hands at the other positions on the chronograph subdials. But of course the immediate element which springs to the eye is the BigEye subdial for the minutes, and this is graduated in 3-minute increments, and allows the watch to be both extremely legible, but also very true to the original form of these pieces, as a high-fidelity mechanical instrument for pilots. If the watch is then turned over, it's quick to see where the inspiration for this watch is, as there's an aeroplane silhouette cut into the caseback, with a style of sunburst effect around it, which hints to the fact that this watch really is designed to be a contemporary of the BigEye Type 20, and that sort of era of aviation. But if you look beyond the caseback, which admittedly is a closed caseback and so you're unable to see it whilst wearing the watch, there's the caliber L688.2. And whilst this movement is based on the Verus 7750, it's a movement which is only made for Longines in this particular watch, and various other watches in their range which have this particular layout. And the beauty of this movement is that it provides you with all the reliability of Verus 7750 as that recognised chronograph movement, which has an incredibly strong history and is one of the most robust movements in this segment. But in addition to that, they've added a column wheel in order to give it a much more crisp and much more refined chronograph engagement, which is also in blued metal, in addition to a custom rotor and full decoration with blued screws. The power reserve has also grown to 54 hours from 44 hours previously, and so you really are getting a wonderful balance of reliability and durability with something which is technologically advanced and interesting in terms of what it offers to the consumer. And so for £1,940, I think this offers a fantastic balance between luxurious finishing, classical styling, and genuine technological worth where the movement is concerned, and the general build of the piece from a very reputable and very historical brand. Now the final 2 watches in this video appeal to a far more technical side than the previous watches I've shown. And the first of these is the Dodane Type 23 GMT. And Dodane is a brand which I think deserves a great deal more respect than people tend to give it, because it's just not a very well-known, rather small French brand. And these watches are made as a sort of a lineup which follows on from the watches that this brand produced for the French Air Force through really the whole of the 20th century. Now in the early 20th century they produced a great deal of cockpit clocks for the French Air Force, but following that and following the creation of the Type 20 and the Type 21 specifications, they became major suppliers of chronographs for the Air Force. However, in modern years, they've produced a variety of spin-off models, which move away from that original design, but still remain extremely useful cockpit instruments for pilots. And this is one of them. This is the Type 23 GMT, which features their Type 23 case, which is a more robust version of previous designs, and features of course the function of a GMT movement. Bearing in mind its specifications, this watch at 42.5mm by 12.6mm is very modestly sized, though it does have quite long lugs, though admittedly the shape of them and the fact that the strap sits very flat against the case means the watch will fit on the wrist very comfortably. But the general design of this watch is to produce something which is legible, very easily used, and has a design which is helpful to the end user. The case itself does retain a great deal of the elements of their flyback chronograph Type 23, with these elongated lugs with a curve on the top and the bottom of their form, and these cutouts in their sides, which allows them to have a much more interesting design, but also a set of screws to hold the strap attached to the case, with a great deal more security than a spring bar. And in terms of the rest of the design of the watch, you do still retain 100-meter water resistance despite those extra 2 pushes in this GMT watch. But it's the functionality and the variation between these watches that's really interesting. Because the watch itself features a design which is very clear, with these large Arabic numerals on the dial, and the date as a pointer-date subdial at 6 o'clock, with Type 23 and GMT on it. You also have the 24-hour scale around the edge of the dial, with a day and night coloration with grey for the day and black for the night, whilst you have a very tight indication of the seconds as well, running around the edge of that dial. However, you do have a choice of different bezels, because you can have either a brushed or polished 12-hour bezel, or a blacked-out 60-minute bezel or 24-hour bezel. And these watches do also come in PVD versions and simple stainless steel versions, and whilst my favourite is the simple stainless steel version, I can understand the appeal of the all blacked out PVD. In any case though, the bezel allows you to track its particular measure, so if you go for the 12-hour bezel, you're able to use it as a countdown bezel for the hours, whilst if you go for the minute one, you can use it for the minutes, and of course the 24-hour version allows you to have a third time zone, in addition to the one that you show on the main hands, the one you show on the GMT hand, and of course the addition of that bezel. But the interesting detail about this watch is that it uses the Dubois-Duprat 312, which is based on the ETA 2892, but uses a true GMT module on top of it, which is produced by the very famous module maker Dubois-Duprat. And the elegance of this is that it allows you to have a highly adjustable and very easily adjusted GMT function, as opposed to a conventional GMT watch, where in cheaper options you have to change the hands altogether and stop the watch to change the GMT time, whereas on a more expensive one you can simply change the hours independently. But in this case it takes you a step further, because you're able to adjust the hours using only those pushers at the 2 and the 4 o'clock positions. Of course, in addition to that, the watch is automatic, and has this higher grade of ETA in the form of the 2892, which does provide you a 4 Hz run, and of course is shock resistant as per the specifications this watch has to adhere to. Of course, this watch does represent a very different style of peel to the other watches in this video, because this piece represents something of a traveller's watch as opposed to a sort of pilot's chronograph, or a very highly legible simple pilot's watch. This is a piece for someone who travels very long distances between time zones, but needs to be on time wherever they are, not simply when one takes off and one lands. Instead, this watch can be adjusted on the fly and very easily in order to make sure the watch is always running the correct time, whether you're simply landing somewhere and spending a certain time in a different time zone and want to monitor wherever you've come from, or if you're travelling perpetually and you want to have the additional functionality and the simple ease of use of knowing what time it is. But of course this is balanced with a real technicality, with a highly legible dial, this luminous element on the hands and on the dial, in addition to the fact that the watch is water resistant to 100 metres, and also can survive full immersion in oil, which is an interesting detail about the seals used. And so for the price of $3,480 to $3,745, I think this is a very reasonable watch in terms of its price in pounds, as a unique watch which really does compete extremely well with the likes of watches like the Rolex GMT-Master 2. Now the final watch I'd like to speak about is a piece from Sinn. And Sinn's of course a very famous manufacturer which produces a great deal of technical watches for pilots. But this piece I'd like to talk about is specifically their top-of-the-range pilot's watch, and at least to my eye is probably the best value pilot's watch there is, bearing in mind the amount of features it has, and dare I say it, possibly the best pilot's watch on the market full stop. And whilst that's a very large claim, I feel this is a watch which certainly rises to the occasion. And this watch has been made to a set of specifications which were laid out by Sinn and worked on in collaboration with the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics at the University of Applied Sciences of Aachen. And interestingly, this watch provides a piece which allows you to have really all the greatest technology a pilot's watch could want. And so I'll start with the case first of all, because the design of this set of specifications was that these watches had to be resilient to the elements, of course, but also had to be able to resist a very high G load, in addition to vibrations, water, and also had to be able to resist the fuels and elements which would be in contact with a watch in the cockpit, such as kerosene. Furthermore, it had to be anti-magnetic, pressure-resistant, and also have no magnetic effect on other items in the cockpit. But the case is integral to this design, because it's 44mm from side to side and 15.6mm thick, making it certainly quite a hefty watch. However, in terms of its weight, it certainly isn't the case, because it's bead-blasted titanium, which features a tegmented process and coating. And what this means is that Sinn effectively treat the surface of the metal to be incredibly hard. And they do this on their steel as well as on their titanium, but it's an expensive process and one which is unique to the brand. And what this allows them to be able to do is to make the surface of the case impervious to scratches from other metals, as a result of the fact that this case is much, much harder on its surface. Pushers have also been coated with a black coating in addition to the tegment process. And this means that they're even more scratch resistant than the rest of the case, and thus the black coating won't wear off, as is often a fear with these styles of coatings on highly touched elements such as pushers. But of course the additional beauty to this coating is that titanium is usually prone to scratches, whereas in this case you don't suffer that problem. They're also integrated into the side of the case, and thus it's helpful to have them in a contrasting colour, because they avoid snags, but you can still see them thanks to that coloration. However, in spite of that, the crown is still easily accessed, despite being sunken into the case somewhat, and of course titanium. But the pushers also feature D3 technology, which means there's no tube which runs through the hole in the case that they attach to. And this means that you're able to get a much tighter seal, and allows the watch to ultimately have a 200 metre water resistance, which is a diver's rating 200 metre, in addition to also being negative pressure resistant, so if you ever suffered sudden decompression, the watch crystal wouldn't be blown out. The watch also features Sinn's proprietary AR dehumidifying technology, which means the watch is filled with argon instead of being filled with air to reduce the deterioration of the oils in the movement, but also features these capsules throughout the case, and indeed the inside of the case, which are copper sulfate filled. And those who remember school chemistry might remember that copper sulfate changes to a colour of blue when it absorbs water. And so what these do is they absorb moisture, and then through the little port in the side of the case, you can see the colour of the copper sulfate and thus how much water it's absorbed, so you can know whether the watch needs to be serviced or not, which is a very clever and very ingenious touch to this watch. Of course, the beauty of these elements also means that the watch itself is operable between minus 45 degrees C and plus 80 degrees C, as a result of the crystal not fogging up or the movement accuracy changing. But where the features are concerned with this watch, there really is a great deal to talk about as well. Because the bezel, also in titanium with a sapphire insert, is fully luminous and features a captive style of bezel attachment. And what this means is that the bezel is actually screwed onto the case, as opposed to simply being held on by a rubber gasket. So this means that if you catch the bezel on something, it won't be popped off. And similarly, the springs that hold it in place and keep its ratcheting in line are much more prone to surviving longer as a result of this particular technique. But the movement is also interesting, because they've used their own proprietary version of a Valjoux architecture with the Sinn SZ01. And what this provides is a 29 jewel movement with an extremely complex set of features, with the date in addition to a chronograph function with central minutes. And this means that the minute hand for the chronographs is actually attached to the centre of the dial, which means it's much more legible at a glance, whilst the hours in matching orange are placed at 6 o'clock. And then you have a 24-hour indicator at the 3 o'clock position to allow you to see which half of the day you're in, whilst the running seconds are placed at 9. And so with this set of features, you really are able to have an extremely complex watch where functionality is concerned, and of course is the perfect set of features for a professional pilot. But the real beauty with this watch is that nothing is superfluous. This watch is entirely functional, from the titanium case to reduce the weight of the watch and to reduce the magnetic signature of the timepiece in the cockpit, to the dial with its matte black print, in addition to the luminous markings around its dial and those high legibility and high contrast multicoloured hands, and also that bezel which features that countdown style, are all features which provide a really wonderful set of options to a pilot who wants to have more functions to use in the cockpit. And so I feel for the price of £4,800 to £5,220, depending on the strap or the bracelet choice, this is an incredibly complex option, with an enormous amount and really a far greater set of options and features than you would expect to get at this price range, or even twice this price range. And so as I finish on this watch, it certainly is the piece which provides the greatest balance of functionality and value where watches and technical watches are concerned. And so I'll conclude the video here, but do tell me in the comments down below what you thought of the video, and also what you thought of my choices in terms of these watches, and whether there's anything else you would have included. And so if you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel, and also to be able to see more videos and content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Armand the Watch Guy, out.